Hey, I want to welcome you to week 5 of our Summer Blockbuster series. And today we have with us Pastor David Collins, who is going to be speaking to you today. And he's going to be talking about regret and how to leave the past in the past. And he's going to be doing that by dealing with the 1980s summer blockbuster movie called Back to the Future, one that definitely was dear to my heart because it was around the time that I was in high school. Imagine that. But I guess I'm dating myself. But I think you'll enjoy this week's message. This is the last of our Summer Blockbuster series messages, and so I think you'll find this very helpful in dealing with those things, because we all have things in our past that haunt us. So we hope that this will free you up, and hope you enjoy this message this week.
How many of you got chills watching that? How many of you actually have seen the movie? All right, I want to see what kind of crowd I'm dealing with. So hands up, you've seen Back to the Future. All right, good deal. My name is David Collins. Thank you for being here this morning. I know you might have been wanting to see one of our better-looking guys on staff. I'm not a pastor on staff. I was campus pastor for a while, and I stepped down to finish my master's degree, which 3 weeks to go, and I'm done with that. And thank you. I'm looking forward to graduating. But anyway, Mike called and asked would I like to do the last of our Blockbuster series, and I said, no, I don't. But he convinced me to do it. He has that way about him. And when he told me what movie it was, I was kind of excited, because this movie was such a part of my young life. I was 13 years old when this movie came out. So that's 30 years plus ago. And I remember it. This is the first movie that I ever watched repeatedly. See, you young people, we didn't have DVD players back then. In fact, the rental of movies was a new thing back in the 80s. And I stayed with a cousin of mine, and his mom and dad had a VCR. Those things used to cost like $1,200 when they first came out. And we rented that movie, and I remember we kept it the whole week, and we watched it every day for an entire week. And not once did I watch it go, I'm tired of this. I enjoyed it every time. Back to the Future was, and if you were growing up in the 80s, you know how great a time that was anyway. There'll never be another decade like it. The 80s was the best time to ever grow up in. Thank you, God, that I was born to grow up in the 80s. But anyway, there's a couple of things I wanted to share with you about the movie. And if you've never seen it, I would encourage you just to go back and watch the first one. You really, to understand why I liked it so much. But do you know Michael J. Fox was not originally casted to be in that role? He wasn't. In fact, they had shot several weeks of film, and the director just kind of said, this guy's not getting it done. And they fired him. And then they hired Michael J. Fox at the time, who was on Family Ties. How many of you remember that show? He was doing Family Ties, so they brought him in to do it. And then the other thing, which was really cool about, I didn't know, was in the original script, the time machine was not a DeLorean car. You want to guess what it was? It was a refrigerator. But they were scared to death that kids would watch the movie and start crawling into refrigerators and closing the doors. They changed the script. So just a couple of bits of information about it, about Back to the Future. Just an awesome movie. It does have a few coarse words here and there if you watch it with your kids. Just a little warning there. And I'm going to have some spoilers today. I'm not going to apologize because, like I said, the movie is 30 years old, but it's a great movie. Today we're gonna talk about the concept of traveling back in time when it comes to dealing with our regret. If you're in here and you're breathing, you have regrets. Some of you are regretting something as simple as what you put on or didn't put on this morning because it's cool in here. Some of you are regretting what you ate last night. It's just not agreeing with you this morning. Some of you are like, oh man, chocolate milk and oysters, that just didn't. Yeah, I know. Some of you are regretting who knows what. And we all have those, and those things happen all the time. We have regrets. But if we get real honest, and if we've been on this earth for a few years, we look back at some things, and when we think about them, all we can do is shake our head and say, what was I thinking? man, I wish I could go back and fix that. Gosh, I wish I could erase that from my memory. So as we look at this movie and we look at the concept of time travel, we're going to see what God says about not only regret, but how we can have less of it as we look to Him for leadership. So we're going to jump right back into the video clips, and we're going to take a look at this scene where Marty and Doc talk about time travel. So we'll roll. That's the end of movie 1, and Marty has returned from 1955, where he got his mom and dad back together to save the lives of him and his 2 siblings so that they existed. He gets back, and he didn't even have a vehicle when he left. He comes back. Now his dad is a successful author and writer. He's got a brand new truck. He's got a beautiful girlfriend. He's fixing to go to the lake for a weekend with her. Everything's great. And then all of a sudden, Doc comes back and says, we got a problem. And it's all precipitated because of what he did when he went back to the past. So it set forth a chain of events, of actions that now is creating problems. And so as we think about the whole idea of decisions that we make and the impact it has on us in the future, I'm going to ask you one simple question. Have you ever in your life wished you could go back and change a decision you made? And those of you who are saying no, you're lying, and when church is over, you need to repent. Everybody has regrets. I spoke with a young lady after first service, and bless her heart, I know we're not supposed to say that, but bless her heart, she was so upset about decisions she had made, and she felt like she was the only one that had made bad decisions. And I said, darling, we're all jacked up. We've all made jacked up decisions. We all have areas in our life and choices we made that we wished, man, wish somebody would have just knocked me out before I made that decision. And some of those things are simple things. You ever wish you could go back and change things when it comes to those of you who are older and have a little bit of money? I'll say, maybe you wish you'd made some better investments. Maybe some of you wish you'd made some better social choices of friends in high school, or maybe a person that you're dated. And if you're sitting next to them right now, please don't let them know that that's what you're thinking about. But perhaps, for me, when I got out of high school, I lamented how I didn't apply myself academically and athletically. I could have done so much more. And all of us go through that. We wish, and if you're sitting here and you're saying, I've never been through that, I've never done that, if you live, you will. You'll say, man, I wish I could have done better. I wish I'd have tried harder. Wish I'd have made different choices. And those can range in different areas, all kinds of avenues. But I'm going to, as a true Baptist minister or Baptist preacher I'm going to give you 3 focal points today that God says about choices and regrets. And here's the first one. Number 1, we, or you, can choose your future. You can choose your future. We're going to be in Deuteronomy chapter 30, and I've got several verses here I'm going to read. Yes, ma'am. Deuteronomy chapter 30, verse 11 says, now, what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It is not up in heaven, so that you have to ask, who will go to heaven to get it and proclaim it to us so we can obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea, so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? No, the word is very near you. It is in your mouth and in your heart, so that you may obey it. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. That's going to be very important. I set before you today life and prosperity, death and destruction. For I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to Him, and to keep His commands, decrees, and laws. Then, when you see then, that means you had to do what was in the previous. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient, and if you are drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day that you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. So these are the Israelites And Moses is giving them instruction coming directly from God. And he says, look, if you want to have a great career where we're going, this is what you got to do. If you want to screw it up, this is what you got to do. And so he's imploring the people, here's how we have to live. And I want to, and there's so much in that scripture that we could go and just spend time looking at that today. But as Moses lays out their choices, it comes down to two choices: obedience and life, or disobedience and death. You know, it just occurred to me, I remember being a young boy and having a screwdriver and going to stick it into a socket. We didn't have those little baby covers that you have today to protect. And just like I'm walking, and Mama's like, "Well, you gonna go ahead, see what happens." And I'm choosing life by not doing it. I'm choosing death possibly by doing it. We have the choice. I know it sounds really simple, but it really comes down to this: successful choices are as easy as listening to God. That's as simple as I can make it. Successful choices, which will lead to fewer regrets, is as easy as listening to God. You choose every day. Now, I'm not talking about what you choose for breakfast. I'm not talking about what you choose to maybe put on that day. But those other choices and how we interact with people, the choices we make to be obedient to God or disobedient to God, impact our future, and we choose those every single day. You know, it's crazy to think of small choices impacting our future. I mean, some of you are kind of like, well, I see what you mean by small choices, but let me give you an example. Everyone in here should be familiar with the Titanic. If you're not, it sank, okay? All right, and here's something I found out about that this I did not know. About a couple of hours before Titanic set sail, the commanding officer, the captain of the ship, decided for whatever reason, I don't believe it was a conspiracy, but he decided to make a change in one of the commanding officers under him on the deck over the crew. It wasn't a big deal, but for whatever reason, he was just like, hey, I'd rather you go with us on this trip than him. So you're going, you go home. Okay, he goes home. They get on the boat. That first night, it's time for the crew to watch for icebergs. And, of course, they did not hit an iceberg the first night, but the crew gets ready to go up in the crow's nest, and there's a tool that they need to take up there with them to help them. It's called binoculars. Well, the guy that went home had the key. Do you think maybe the choice to get the key from him might have made a difference in the lives of those passengers a couple of days later? We don't know, but that we have that to ponder. So there's the box with the binoculars in it to go up in the crow's nest, and they're like, we don't have a key. All right, well, we'll go up. We don't need it. How many people died on that ship? 700? Am I right? I'm just asking. But do you see, a small decision impacted the lives of so many other people. We're going to take a look at another clip, and we're going to talk about how a foolish moment can affect our future. Let's roll with our next clip. That's actually a clip from the second movie, and what's happening here is Marty, when he went back to 1955, he inadvertently left a book on sports history that Biff found, and he used that by looking at who won the World Series, the Super Bowl, all that, and he used that to gamble, and that's why at this point he comes back and he sees that Biff is a multi-millionaire. And the reason he screams, if you didn't know, is because the woman he's now married to, his third wife, is Marty's mom. That's why he freaks out. Now you say, well, that's a movie and that's crazy, and what does that have to do with regrets and impacts of choices? A little more serious note than the Titanic story a while ago. Just this past year, I'm a school teacher sometimes, and at least for a few more days, and I did a lesson with my students on choices, and I chose Lynn Bias. Now, some of you in here are going, yeah, I know Lynn Bias. Some of you are going, who is that? In 1986, my favorite NBA team of all time, the Boston Celtics, had just won the NBA championship. They had three of the best players, whether you like Boston or not. They were three of the best players in the history of the game. Larry Bird, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, best front line in history. They had just won the world championship, and Red Auerbach was their owner, and he had manipulated a deal, and he got Boston the number 2 draft pick in the upcoming draft. Now, I can tell you who was the number 1 pick for you Carolina fans. It was Brad Daugherty that played at Chapel Hill and went to Cleveland Cavaliers. The next pick was Len Bias, who was a Maryland Terrapin. You still maybe not know who he was. Well, I'm going to tell you who he was. He was the next Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan had been in the NBA 2 years at that point. Len Bias was 6'9", 210 pounds of 5% body fat. This guy could jump out of the gym. He was just becoming what everyone thought he was going to be. And he had just been drafted by the world champion Boston Celtics. They interviewed him on draft day. He said, man, I couldn't have done this any better. I'm going to be playing with the world champions. I'm going to be playing beside Larry Bird. I'm going to be learning from him. He was all excited. Reebok, now this is 1986, y'all. Reebok had not played a single NBA game. They offered him a $1.6 million contract to be their spokesperson. He hadn't played a single game yet. That was big money back then. It's still big money to me, but, you know. 2 days later, I'm sitting in my cousin's house, and the news comes on, and Len Bias is dead. And I said, this is not real. This can't be real. Len Bias, for those of you who don't know, after he signed basically a conditional statement that he would join the team and all this stuff, he decided to go back to the university and hang out with some of his friends, and they decided to do cocaine. Depending on who you talk to, I've met his mom. I've listened to his mom talk. Some say it was the first time he did it. Some say he had done it occasionally. Either way, he took 1 dose of cocaine, and he stopped breathing, and he died. Now, this is an extreme story of a bad choice, but can you imagine, even today, his mom, the heartache she experiences every day of her life from his choice? Some of you are sitting here right now and you're dealing with junk, and that's the only word I can come up with, because of choices that people around you have made and you're dealing with. Maybe it was your parents. Maybe it was your grandparents. Maybe it was a spouse, an ex-spouse. You're dealing with it every single day, and only you know the heartache from the choices that were made. For example, I don't know any of you in here your backstory, but can you imagine? My wife is from a household that suffered with alcoholism, and you know it's not a traumatic thing for her now, but when she and I talk, it comes out of what she experienced, of what was denied her from her father because of his addiction to alcohol. Some of you are dealing with things that are beyond your control, and it's not fair, and I'm sorry, but it's how it is. But here's the sadder statement. Some of you are making choices right now that are going to cripple your children and your grandchildren, because you're not weighing out the possibility of how it's going to impact them down the road. Marty goes back in time, realizes his mistake has had a ripple effect, and his world has blown up. And God didn't intend for it to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. We don't want to let a foolish moment take away from our future. Now, I don't see any young kids, so I'm going to go into an area I didn't go in. Well, I'm sorry, I do see a couple of children. I'm going to be very sensitive to it because there was no warning. But girls, guys, young ones, you're going to be faced with some decisions here very soon that can impact your life in a rough way. True story, 8th grade student at my school last year, He and I had the talk. I told him what pressures were coming. He ignored them. He left my middle school with an STD. An 8th grade male student, STD, because he chose to go away. I poured into him hard. You're going to be tempted. You got to stay with STD in the 8th grade because of a poor choice. Now, and when I found out about the STD, I said, dude, what are you going to tell your children when they're born and they've got it? Oh, no, that ain't going to happen. Dude, you more than likely they will. And I'm getting kind of off my topic here for a minute, but I just feel pressed to say that. Girls and guys, you're going to be tempted to make some choices that in one moment impact your entire life forever. And yeah, God can forgive, but you're still going to pay the consequences of those choices. Going on to verse 19. This day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life. Now choose life, so that you and your children may live, and that you may love the Lord your God, listen to His voice, and hold fast to Him. For the Lord is your life, and He will give you many years in the land He swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. See, my choices have lasting implications. My choices can impact my daughter, my son, their children, my relatives in a way that I can't even imagine right now. And sadly, some of you are making choices right now that you won't even live to see the impact, but it ain't going to be good. You know, in April of 72, I was in my mama's belly. I was a few days away. I was born in May. But on April the 28th, my dad, and if any of you have ever met my dad and you've tried to shake his hand, he doesn't shake with his right hand because my dad doesn't have a right hand. He wears a prosthetic arm. Sometimes he has a hook on. On April the 28th, my dad, on a piece of land that I can take you to right now, over towards Fairmont, my dad had bought that land to have and to do things with. He was clearing out stumps. The trees had been cut down. He was taking up the stumps. And he was using dynamite back in the time when you could go and get dynamite. Can't do it anymore. And he had put dynamite in a charge under a stump, and he backed up so far, and he's told me the story many times, and he detonated the charge. Dynamite didn't blow up. He pulled the I forgot what you call that, but he pulled the device up, and charged it again, it didn't go up. So my dad, the smartest man I've ever known, goes over to the stump, sticks his arm under the stump, and pulls the dynamite out. Well, the problem was that they think happened is that when he sent the charge through the wire to the detonator, the wire was crimped so the charge couldn't go through. But when he pulled the dynamite out, the wire straightened. The dynamite went off in my dad's hand, less than a foot from his face. So today, my dad has no arm, and he has probably 10% of the vision he should have, 15% of the vision he should have, less of the hearing he should have. And I've dealt with that my whole life. In fact, it was such, do you know, when I would see men driving their family around in a car, I didn't get that because my mom had to drive us everywhere we went. I thought women were supposed to drive the car. I was like, your dad drives? Something wrong with your mom? It was a shock. I grew up with a dad. I saw a photo of him years later of him when he was in the National Guard, and he's got both his hands on his rifle. And the picture looked doctored to me because I was like, my dad, that doesn't look real. My dad's not supposed to have a hand. Now, my dad is a great man of God. I wish I was half the man my dad is. But I grew up with a father who couldn't play sports with me, who couldn't take me hunting, who couldn't do a lot of things with me because of the choice he made that day. And it was, I mean, come on, everybody in here knows you don't mess with the dynamite. But in just a moment of making a poor decision, he impacted myself and my two sisters and my mom. My mom has had to be his caregiver during that. My mom has had to do a lot of things that a mother and wife shouldn't have to do because he couldn't do it. He couldn't see. So my point in telling you that whole story is this. His choice to do it his way impacted everyone in his direct life. Think about the choices that you're making. Think about the decisions that you make, even the small ones. Because as we'll see in just a moment, we don't, as disciples of Christ and as individuals living this life, have to deal with that. Point number 3. Did I give you point number 2? Don't let a foolish moment take away your future. Point number 3. We need to learn from our past so we can grow in our future. There's nothing you can do about those bad decisions. They're there. We can't erase them. We can't take them out of the history book. There's nothing you can do about it. So the best thing we can do is to learn from it. You know, my son, a couple years ago, I was thinking about this. He was having a real tough time subtracting numbers when he used big numbers. You know, like, say, 16,547 minus 12,000. Because he couldn't grasp the concept of, okay, you got to draw a line through the number, add 10 to it, then subtract. But here's the thing. When he learned how to do it, and he struggled for a couple of days, 3 days, 4 days, learning how to do it. Here's the thing. When he learned how to do it, I've never, ever heard him say, God, Dad, I'm so sorry about being a failure, not knowing how to subtract those numbers. He's never done that. So why do we do it with our past? It's in our past. As Pumbaa said on The Lion King, you got to put your behind in your past. There's nothing you can do about it. You got to learn from it. And I shared this with the first group, and I'm going to share it with you. And please, if what I say offends you, please give me grace and forgive me. But I am man enough to come up here and admit my mistake. When I was about 22 years old, I had just, I was a little older than that. I was recently married. I made a complete fool of myself. I made a racist, bigoted comment to a gentleman in a store one day. Now, we're talking something that happened 20-some years ago. And I think about that probably every other week. And I regret it so much because that's not who I am. But in that moment of a disagreement over something stupid, I took the moral high ground and used a racial slur at this guy and walked out of there thinking I was a tough dude. And I would give anything to talk to that guy and tell him I'm sorry. I would. Because it was stupid, it was asinine, it was ignorant, it was everything that you want to say negative. Because that's not who I was. And I hope that one day God will give me the opportunity in heaven to bump into him and know and say, man, I'm so sorry. But I learned from that. I can say I learned from that. I've asked God to forgive me for it multiple times, and God has said, you're forgiven. Learn from it. Move on. I've forgiven you. Let it go. And we beat ourselves up about the decisions we made and regrets that we have. And the regrets are there for a reason. Learn from it. And say, I'm not going to be the person I was yesterday. I'm not going to make that same choice that I made then. I'm going to learn from that decision, and I'm going to be what God has called me to be. We need to learn from our past so we can grow in our future. Let's take a look at this clip of Doc explaining how time travel works. So, he explains how time travel works, how they can go back and he can see things. And as he explains this to Marty, it seems, just so natural. And here's what I want to say about that. It is very important to remember where you've been, as I was saying before the clip. We want to learn from those past decisions. Don't discard them as being worthless. Now, we can look at them and say, man, that was so messed up. That was so horrendous. That was so terrible. I can either choose to ignore that it ever happened, or I can choose to say I'm going to learn from that experience. In Psalm chapter 90, verse 12, it says, teach us to number our days, that we may gain a heart of wisdom. Relent, Lord. How long will it be? have compassion on your servants. Satisfy us in the morning with your unfailing love, that we may sing for joy and be glad all our days. Make us glad for many days, as you have afflicted us for many years, as we have seen trouble. See, when we decide to learn from our past and see things in a biblical, godly perspective, we learn to treasure those moments that we have. For example, the other day I was cutting grass and a thought came to my mind, and God just said to me, He said, when's the last time you prayed for that guy? I've never prayed for him. Okay, why don't you start there? And so it was impacted upon me that what I was doing for him, what was I lifting him up for? So I'm sorry, I'm kind of, my mind is just kind of scattered as I try to bring this all into focus. Time is too valuable to waste on regret. It's too important. From God's point of view, the time we have is so important to God's kingdom. It's so important to the people in our lives. It's so important to the people that we interact with that will never, ever hear the gospel of Jesus Christ unless we choose to share it with them. And one of my biggest fears is one day standing with someone who's judged for eternity, and they look at me and say, you worked with me, and you never told me. You never challenged me. You never pushed me. When we see each day, each hour, each moment as God's gift to us, then we can't be hung up on regret. We have to move on. Now, I shared with you the story about my dad earlier about his accident, and no kidding, this was not planned to be in my sermon. Yesterday, my mom came by the house, and she told me, she said, I just came back from town with your dad. He's very upset. Mama, what's wrong with Daddy? She said, he's crying. He's upset. Okay, and my dad is the toughest man I know. She said he was talking about how much his children lost when he had his accident. See, my dad, when he had his accident, they wouldn't let him work. My dad tried to go back to work. He worked in probation services. They said, no, you're not working. My dad said, can you find me a desk job? I don't want to grow up in a home where my children don't see me working. I said, no. They gave him his disability, said, you're not working. Well, my dad he would have had a very good career. He was very young when he had his accident, and there was some financial struggles because of the fact my dad was not working. And so he was telling my mom that we missed out on so much, that his children, myself and my two sisters, missed out on so much because of his accident. And I told Mom, I said, I can't believe you're telling me this. This is exactly what we're talking about in my sermon tomorrow. I had not said anything to my mom about it. And so in that moment, I looked at my mom and I said, Mom, look at what we got from that accident. I got to watch a grown man live out his testimony every day. My dad never bellyached and blamed God for his problems. My dad was in his Bible every night. My dad prayed for his children beside his bed every night. We saw that. My dad taught us in our home. We saw in my mom, we saw the faithfulness of a loving mother and wife as she supported him and took care of us in ways that he couldn't. We saw all that, and that's not anything I would take in place of my dad's accident. I saw God in my home every day when I saw my dad. I got to live with that. So when God says that He can take all things and make them for His glory, I saw that. And I told Mom, I said, please tell Dad I wouldn't have had him any other way. Because if you take that away, then who's to say I'm going to be where I am today? Who's to say he would have been the man of God he would be today? So as I close this, I want to bring up one other point about this movie. And I don't know where you are in your walk with God today, but at the end of in the middle of movie 1, Doc is shot and killed. You remember that? As Marty jets off into the past, these terrorists roll up and they shoot Doc and they kill him right in front of Marty. So when Marty gets to the past, he's talking to Doc and he says, I got to tell you what happens to you on that night. Doc says, no, you're not going to tell me. That'll change the future. That'll mess things up. It'll change the future. So Marty writes him a letter and says, on the night that I go back in time, you're shot and killed. you got to know that. You can't be there. You don't want to die. Doc tears the note up in front of him. He won't read it. Well, you fast forward, of course, you can tell by the movie clips that Doc did go back and read the letter. He taped it back together and he read it. And so the night when they shot him, he actually had on a bulletproof vest and he survived. What are you talking about, Mr. David? I'm telling you about this. We all have a future. And it's one that goes beyond this earth. There's going to be a place where there is going to be regret for eternity, and it's a place not created for you. It was a place created for the fallen angels. But it's a place where God's judgment has to be executed. And just as Marty had to tell Doc about what the future is, I can't get off the stage without telling you what our future is. Guys, there's a place called heaven. And that place is for those of us who have allowed Jesus' blood to be put on all of those things that we have regrets for, on all of those sins that we've ever committed. And Jesus' blood was applied there because only Jesus' blood could forgive us. You can't find it in Allah. You can't find it in Buddha. Jesus was the Son of God. He was perfect. And because of that perfect sacrifice, it was freely given, but it's not applied unless you receive it. And so if you receive that gift, yeah, you might still have those regrets, because I do. But you know what I can say is those regrets that came from my sin are forgiven. And one day when I leave this earth, I will face Jesus. I will bow at his feet and I will tell him thank you for not only helping me get past my regrets, but forgiving me of my sins. And if you're here today and you're saying, no, Mr. David, you don't understand. I've done some terrible things. Let me tell you something. Paul was a murderer of Christians. David committed adultery, had a man murdered because he wanted his wife. But yet they're two of our leaders of our faith. You saying that God can forgive them but not you? There's nothing you've done that can't be put under that blood. I don't care what you did, how many times you did it, where you did it, it can be forgiven. But here's what you give up when you are forgiven. I'm giving Jesus the authority to run my life. I become Jesus' slave, and when I become Jesus' slave, I'm not a slave, I'm actually free. I'm free of the burden of the sin. I'm free from the burdens of this world. You say, well, I'm just not ready to make that choice. Okay? But you got to understand, once the truth has been shared with you, it's just like the speed limit. If I tell you what the speed limit is, and you choose to ignore it, you can't complain when you get a ticket. If you ignore the truth of God's word, if you ignore the truth of the gospel, then when you stand before God, if that blood's not applied, then you got to face God's judgment. So just as Marty reached out to Doc in love, I cannot leave the stage without reaching out to you in love. The gospel is for you. It was for all of us. It's the good news. And I just challenge you today that if today is the day, I'm asking you to give it to him.